Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Is It Still Scary, a 5-Second Films podcast. I am your host, Brian Ferenzi, along with Maria del Carmen. And on this very special episode, in honor of the release of Mad Max Fury Road on Blu-ray, we are joined by director George Miller. And also, of course, joining us on the panel today are Bing and Lena. So I'm going to jump right in. George, obviously, it's kind of legendary by now, like all the setbacks you've had on the production of Mad Max Fury Road, the long, furious road it took to get to making this movie made. See what I did? Yeah. Anyway, after Australia became no longer usable, flowers were growing everywhere, and it was just like rainforest. Like it became a green place that shouldn't have existed.
Exactly.
You settled on Namibia, and I wanted to know, what was it about Namibia?
It never rains, and it has no trees.
No trees at all.
Well, as you go inland, it has trees, but there's a big cold current coming up from the Antarctica, and the way that it interacts with the hot desert wind, there's mist, but it never rains. So the coast is just desert.
Yeah.
And the one tree you see in the movie, we had to bring in and make.
Oh, the one where they pitch it up.
Tree, yeah.
Oh gosh,
yeah.
I was wondering, like, is that one tree in Namibia, and then you just ruined it?
Well, you see trees, but they're brought in and so on, and it's people say it's the place that God made when He was angry, but it's also incredibly beautiful, of course.
Yeah.
I mean,
so it was a worthy substitute for Australia at that point.
Yeah, the spiritual home of the movie is Broken Hill. It's Broken Hill in the center of Australia, and believe it or not, it was 15 years it hadn't rained to this degree, and suddenly it virtually flooded. And we were all ready to go. We had our vehicles built there. We had all our stunt rigging and so on.
And then it decided not to be a desert anymore.
The very moment you wanted to film.
Yeah, exactly.
There were other places that you considered, though, right?
We looked at China, and we looked at Chile because it has the same coast. The west coast of Chile is very similar to the west coast of Africa, lower southern Africa. But the most efficient place was there because on the coast there's also big infrastructure. We were able to, there's big cranes, there's a big fishing fields there, and you had big wharves with big cranes, and we could lift up all our vehicles and put them there.
Yeah.
What was it like just having this huge, expansive, I guess, desert and having a moving set where I guess you had to keep everyone together and how to stop them from getting so exhausted?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. The best way is to say it was a military exercise, and there were teams of people. There were the stunt crew, there were the camera crews, there's the art department and costume and everything, and we basically had to build a tent city to cater for everyone because there's a massive crew. A lot of it was stunt rigging. I mean, we were shooting for 138 days. And big stunts every day, and we had to be obsessed with safety. I mean, the biggest dread I had in the pit of my stomach was, what do we have to do today not to kill anybody? That was the big thing.
Trying to keep the tents full.
Sorry?
Is it kind of like having a travelling caravan? You don't leave anybody behind.
No, exactly. And touch wood, we had no serious injuries.
It looks gorgeous. Like, I'm a big fan of the technical side of all of this. And I understand, if I remember correctly, you shot on 6 or 7 Arri Alexas.
Yeah.
And then, 50 or so Canon 5D Mark IIs.
Yeah.
I wanted to know, I know obviously the DOP had a lot to do with it, but what made you choose those cameras?
Well, the Alexa, had the technical specifications. We knew it would hold up to all the dust and grime and the shaking and being knocked around. And Johnny Seal was extraordinary, one of the great Australian cameramen. He came out of retirement. He literally retired 1 month before. And Dean Semler, who I'd shot the other movies with, he couldn't do the movie suddenly, so he came here to shoot Maleficent with Angelina Jolie. And Johnny said, "Hey Johnny, do you want to do one more movie?" And he did. And he was extraordinary. He turned 70 on the movie, and we'd worked 20 years before on Lorenzo's Oil, and he was up there in amongst it, operating the cameras and whatever. He's an incredibly physically fit guy, and he just knew that we were shooting, something that was very, very difficult. Everything was real people, real vehicles crashing in the real desert. It was augmented by CG, but mainly safety harnesses and so on. And as you point out, the great thing about it is the cannons.
Yeah,
If
the
you
5Ds.
smash them, if you wanted another camera, you could go to the airport and buy another one for $15. Whereas the Alexas, if you smashed, we didn't lose an Alexa, but if you smashed an Alexa, it wasn't very good.
You had to capture it because you only had one shot at a lot of these.
That's
stunts, so
exactly
was just
it.
like-
We had one take.
Yeah.
And the worst ones were like at the very end with the war rig and the tanker roll. It's one thing to get. We were initially going to do it CG, but you couldn't do a CG scene at the very climax of a movie where everything else was real. Then we were going to do it a model, but models don't work at daytime. You can get away with them at night.
Yeah.
And then we were going to do a remote control vehicle, but you couldn't do it as precisely.
Yeah.
So we had to put someone, Lee Adamson, who was the driver, who was a great driver. But the big thing, he had to flip that thing.
Yeah.
And he had to land exactly between two big rocks, right in front of our camera. I thought, it's never going to happen. But he got it. He just
did it.
hit that sweet spot. It was just funny.
That's amazing.
That was a big worry, apart from making sure that no one was hurt.
Do you know how many cameras there were altogether?
I would say on that stunt, just for safety, probably about 8 cameras. But some of them, were high up, and they were just safety cameras in case we
Yeah.
missed something. The whole point was to come and land right down
Yeah,
the
in
barrel.
one shot.
Because this is a movie where everything has to be shot in what they call the Z or Z axis, in and out of the screen. It 3-dimensionalizes everything.
Yeah.
You're reading space. If it's too much profile, you're not reading it as well. It just,
I know you had Eve Ensler come and consult on the film. I think that's amazing. At what point did she come in? How early? And what was the decision like, kind of bringing her in?
the War Boys had, serious military guys going through, even though, going through military exercises. So they had that. And, but the girls, the wives, didn't have anything. So Eve, who was done in Australia, she's incredibly busy and doing so much stuff around the world, like epic work. And she just happened to be in Africa for that 1 week that we
You
needed
managed to
her.
put your hand up and be like, Eve.
Yeah, and she
Please.
came in and she was fantastic, and it just
Yeah.
gave them some glue, some subtext, some underpinning to work with. So even though you see them and no one mentions, the feminist issues of the story, it glued those wives together.
And do you think, did she change any of the script? Or was that kind of, did she ever, or she just kind of work with the tone of the girls as a group?
She worked with the tone of the
Yeah.
girls, and believe it or not, what was really interesting, she ran workshops, and the stunt guys turned up.
Oh, really?
And,
They wanted to get in on the...
Yeah, and just to understand it was fantastic. They were wonderfully
do
moving
some vagina
sessions.
monologues.
I think a lot of what I get on repeat viewing with Mad Max is just discomfort. A lot of like a great moment, for one of my favorite moments is a little thing. It's when he gets the mask off, and it's like we've been with him on that journey, that little journey, that struggle to be slightly less in pain,
Yeah, that's
and
good.
we're like on his side
like a
in
little
this
arc in
little
itself.
arc.
Yes.
And of course, immediately it goes wrong again. But
The mask also kind of mirrored the chastity belts for me, because it's only when Max joins the wives that have already just shaken off their chastity belts, he gets to take off his.
Yeah.
Yeah.
those
Blocking
little
orifice.
victories, those little victories throughout the film,
Yeah.
those
Yeah,
little
it's, those,
victories
it's the little things, I think, rather
that
than...
really cement,
Yeah.
that give us a feeling of progression.
I never thought of this and the chastity belt.
I saw that immediately. I was like, oh, well, where's his chastity belt doesn't get to come off. Hang on, excuse me, Max needs his chastity belt off.
And their usefulness as human
Yeah.
flesh is shared. Max, of course, is a universal donor, and
Yeah.
the women are the
There
only
is an
like
expert.
They're just breeders.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, and it's when it's very hyper masculine and hyper feminine. It like his export is his voice and his shouting, and he's had that taken away, and their export is their sexuality and their.
How do you come up with the idea for the world?
You know, the very okay, just going back to a longer. Can I give a long answer?
Oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely.
Fine.
So
leave now.
We need shareable, bite-sized content.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm kidding.
okay. Bite size. Okay.
We're not that generation.
Yeah.
We just
Give us
made
the
it
long
up.
answer.
No, but believe it or not, the very, very first Mad Max, which you made all those years ago, 3 decades ago, it was set a few years from now for one very good reason, is that we couldn't afford to, our budget was so low, we couldn't afford to fill the streets with real life people and real vehicles. So we had to shoot in empty back streets and decrepit buildings because we couldn't afford to hire expensive modern buildings. So that led to a kind of more elemental world. And there were certain rules, like just because it's the wasteland, it doesn't mean that people have lost their sense of humour. In fact, just because it's the wasteland, it doesn't mean that people can't make beautiful things. So they can take a steering wheel or, a bit of decoration on their bodies or whatever and make it beautiful or interesting. And everything had to have more than one purpose. The Immortan's mask was both so that he can inhale filtered air, but also had to look formidable and had to look scary. Like Furiosa's arm, that's his arm. It couldn't be just a prosthetic, therapeutic thing. It had to have a lot of function and had to look sort of impressive in some way. So the vehicles were old technology. They weren't modern microprocessor, crumple technology that you have in your computerized cars because they don't survive. It's the old technology that survived.
My favorite car is, and it's just a tangent. My favorite car is Immortan's one. That's like 2 or 3
Three-storied.
Cadillac,
Two Cadillacs,
fronts,
Amazing.
And
just the elevation and the monster. I love it.
that was a real car. It was amazing to be in. It was a V16,
Yeah.
2 V8 engines put together, and to stand next to it and hear it go was huge. But it's again, it follows a logic. He's the most powerful, tyrant of the wasteland, so he's able to have something.
The
like
kind
that.
of car that one might have as a trophy.
Yes.
What happened to the car?
It's still around.
It's not in your
It's still in
garage.
Australia. It never gets wrecked in the movie.
Yeah.
It
So
ends
if-
up surviving the movie.
Did you ever get to drive any of the cars, or are you not interested in that?
No,
Because I would, on my days off,
But
I'd-
I wasn't allowed to. I mean, I'm not a good driver. And that thing, if you get in it and you don't,
Yeah, it's
You're
gonna.
gonna do some damage.
you get
Yeah.
I sat in it. I did drive Nux's car a little bit, but that's just a more normal car.
I know you've been planning this film for a long time. Are you glad it's happened now? Do you think it would have been a different film before?
Yeah, I think
different
it would have
people
been
and
different
different-
people. There
yeah.
was a time that Mel Gibson was going to do it, and then when he hit all that turbulence in his life, and time went by, it was no longer a story about an older warrior. And then at one time, Heath Ledger, we talked every time he come through Australia, we talk about the character, and then we lost Keith so tragically, and then Tom Hardy walked in the door, and he reminded me, had the same energy that Mel Gibson had 30 years before, when Tom was 6 weeks old when we shot the first movie. And
So it's all meant
but
to
he
be.
had that same energy, and there's something about him that's immediately really accessible and lovable. At the same time, there's a volcanic quality. For a character who says but a few words in the movie, you want someone who just projects a lot. It would have been different. I think the actual allegorical qualities of the story, there's always power structures, there's always Citadel, there's always the tyrannical few controlling the resources, in dominating the many. Look at any citadel through history; they all have the same architecture. whether the great forts in India of the Mughal emperors, the palace in Kyoto, they're always the same. And arguably, the people live in the penthouses are more powerful than the people homeless on the street below.
Finally, I wanted to ask, since typically we are a horror podcast, I wanted to ask, like, what movies still scare you to this day? Is there anything from cinema you think still has
Well,
a
the
lasting
ones,
power over you?
the documentaries, really.
Yeah.
When
Just reality.
reality is scary, but
It's
in
like the
terms of a
inconvenient truth.
well-crafted, horror movie, which is a genre I really like. I mean, going back a long time, I remember sitting in the cinema watching Silence of the Lambs and thinking, Jonathan Demme, you have got me. I just, I'm just scared out of my wits. And the first Alien, I had that same experience with Ridley Scott. I love Guillermo del Toro's movies. There's something about so powerful in the imagery and the feelings and the atmosphere of those movies. I'm sure I'm missing out on a lot.
Do you think we'll ever see a horror movie from you in the future?
Oh, God, I haven't even thought about it.
Because I remember when, just in the beginning, all those effects when Max is running through that corridor and he sees like all the faces of the people he couldn't save, and they're warping in and out, and you've mixed skulls in there. I mean, that's some really freaky imagery. So I'm like, this is just a taste of, I think, what George Miller could do.
I mean, I do like, the thing I like most about being in the cinema is just sitting back and getting sucked up on the screen.
Yeah.
Well,
And the horror movies really, really do that when they're really serious about their business. Not just to gross you out, but actually take you through a suspenseful experience. There's something incredibly powerful about that experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
yeah, they should come out with a
That's
special edition of
Yeah.
horror movies on DVD where it's just like a
It's just
vision
like,
that
no.
will just hand it to them.
In the modern day, I watch them with my kids, but usually at home, and it doesn't have the same effect.
Yeah.
But what was the last horror movies that really affected you guys?
Gosh, I mean, The Descent, that one.
The Descent
I didn't
is
see it, I know
just never
about it.
going caving
Yeah,
ever.
Mine most recently, and it's a sign of the times, was a video game.
Oh,
I
really?
played Until Dawn recently
a
on
horror game.
PlayStation 4. It's a point and click adventure game made for a modern console. It's gorgeous looking.
Yeah.
It has a cast of film actors who've been mapped, and they mocapped every scene in a studio. And you make decisions on their behalf. It's a teen slasher setup that you control, and you can't take anything back. Once you've set it in motion, you are responsible for what happens to them.
Is that personal?
I loved it.
While you're talking, I mean, I'm not very good hand-eye coordination, but my sons are very good. But I must say, the film, and I'll call it a film, the cinema which affected me most was Breaking Bad.
Oh, yeah.
And it was irresistible. I mean, you just had to watch it, and it's so film savvy. What, you disagree?
We were talking about this
We were
on the
having a
way in.
debate about the word. I got through the whole first season, and then I just felt like the hero's journey was so. Anyway.
But now you're gonna
different.
have
I won't
to.
argue.
Well,
now I'm
my
gonna.
wife did the same thing. She edited Fury Road, and she sort of at some point she turned off it. And I said, you just got to get through it, because I think it's some of the greatest 68 hours of moving image ever, and it so references cinema. I say to people, you come to me and say, do you want to go to film? I want to go to film school. I say, the best thing you can do is watch Breaking Bad like 6 times, and each time pay attention to the writing, pay attention to the camera, pay attention to the sound, pay attention to the acting, pay attention to those things, and you will pick up more if you really, really try to understand why it works, and you can actually deconstruct why it works, and you can actually get in there and understand the dynamics going on. You'll end up with probably a better filmmaker
Boot
than
camp.
if you went to film school.
That's your film school right there.
Yeah.
I want to thank George Miller for coming out. It's been a
Yeah.
pleasure having you, and I want to thank Chloe and Claire and Louie at Warner Brothers for helping put this together. Mad Max Fury Road is out on Blu-ray now, and of course, I want to thank Lena Bing and Maria for joining us together on this
Thanks for
podcast.
having us.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Even in this
Yeah, even in this gruesome.
And now the next phase of the interview is how much pain can you endure?